She put her hand flat against my sternum and pushed. Not hard enough to knock me over, hard enough to make the point. I was standing on the aft deck of a 62-foot sailing yacht in Vance Harbor on a Sunday afternoon in June, wearing a dress I had driven 4 hours to put on, surrounded by 16 of Claudia's friends, and my stepmother pressed her palm against my chest and said, "You were not invited. This is my boat. I need you to leave." 16 people watched. Some held champagne. Some had the particular expression people have when something is happening that they aren't sure how to place. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They all looked at me the way people look when they're waiting to see whether the person being asked to leave will leave quietly. I looked at Claudia's hand. Then I looked at her face. What I did not do in that moment, what I chose not to do, was tell her what I already knew. What I had spent 4 months learning, document by document, through an attorney's office in downtown Vance Harbor, and a series of conversations with a man named Martin Osei, who had known my father for 26 years and had been waiting, patiently, for someone to ask the right questions. What I did not tell Claudia, on that aft deck, with 16 witnesses and the harbor light coming in flat and gold from the west, was that the yacht she had just pushed me off was registered in my name, had been for 22 years. Port. Was still, before I tell you what happened when Vera Stanton walked into that marina office, with the original registration documents and a letter from the Vance County Probate Court, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if any part of this story is already sitting somewhere it recognizes. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I read everyone. Quack. Now let me take you back to where this started, because the hand on my sternum was not the beginning. It was just the moment my stepmother made witnesses. My mother's name was Susan Hildejo. She died of an aggressive cancer when I was 11 years old, in the spring, when the harbor was beginning to warm again and the boats were coming back to their slips after winter storage. She had grown up near the water. She had taught me to read tides before I could read chapter books. She had a way of standing at the bow of any vessel, feet slightly apart, face into the wind, that made her look like she had always belonged there and always would. My father, Robert Hartfield, was a naval engineer. He designed commercial vessel systems. He understood boats the way musicians understand instruments, not just mechanically but in some register below the technical, in the place where affection lives. When I was 9 years old, 2 years before we lost my mother, my father bought a sailing yacht. 62 feet, teak decks, a catch-rigged sail plan he had been waiting years to own. He spent 3 weekends with me walking through her before the purchase was finalized, showing me the systems, the rigging, the name that was painted in Navy script along her hull, the Susan H. He named her for my mother, while my mother was still alive to see it, Holsgoed. She stood at the dock the afternoon the name was painted and pressed both hands to her face and laughed, the way people laugh, when they've been given something they didn't know they needed. When my father completed the registration, he put the vessel in my name. I was 9 years old. He sat me down in his office at home and explained it in the way. He explained important things, carefully, with the patience of someone who believed children deserved accurate information about their own lives. This is yours, Lena. Not when you're older. Now, place a guide. I'm putting it in your name because it carries your mother's name and it should belong to the person who loves her most. I'll take care of it until you're ready. But it's yours. I didn't fully understand what that meant at 9. I understood it was a gift. I understood the gravity of it in the way children understand gravity, through weight, not explanation. I kept the document in a folder in my bookshelf next to the books my mother had read to me, Liz, because it felt like it belonged near those things. 2 years later, my mother was gone. My father grieved for 3 years in the particular way of people who have lost the person who made the rest of life make sense. He was present, he was functional, he loved me with everything that was still operating inside him. But some rooms in him had gone dark, and he spent those years learning to live in the rooms that still had light. When I was 14, he introduced me to Claudia Voss. She was 41, recently divorced, and she moved through social rooms the way something moves when it has decided where it is going and has no intention of adjusting for traffic. Cool. She was not overtly unkind to me in those early months. She was something more strategic than unkind. She was indifferent in a way that communicated selection, the way certain people manage their warmth as a resource, distributing it to whoever produces the return they're looking for. I did not produce the return she was looking for. My father married Claudia 8 months after introducing us. I was still 14. I sat in the third row of a ceremony at the Vance Harbor Yacht Club with my Uncle Dennis on one side and an empty chair on the other, and I watched my father take a woman's hand who I understood with the specific clarity children have. About things adults have not yet admitted to themselves, would reshape every room in our house from the inside out. 6 months after the wedding, I was enrolled at Carrington Academy, a boarding school 11 hours away by train. Claudia had a phrase she used for it that I still hear in my memory with the precise intonation she gave it. A tremendous opportunity. Bot Carrington is a tremendous opportunity for a girl with Lena's abilities. I was 14 years old. I had just lost my mother, and then my father had found someone new, and now I was being sent 11 hours away to an institution that was very good and very far, and would conveniently not require anyone to figure out how to have me in the house. I understand now that my father believed it genuinely. I believe he told himself it was the right thing, that Carrington would give me something, that the distance was circumstantial. I believe Claudia made that very easy to believe, and that my father, who was still rebuilding the rooms that had gone dark, did not look too carefully at the architecture of the argument. I also believe the Susan H. never left the Vance Harbor Marina during my first year away. I came home for summers. The house had changed in the specific way houses change when someone new has had a full year to work on them. New furniture, new colors on the walls. Claudia's things in the kitchen, the bathrooms, the hallway, accumulating. In the way a tide accumulates, consistently, without announcement, until the original shoreline is simply not where it was. I learned to move through the house, the way I learned to move through Carrington, efficiently and without requiring anything from the space that the space wasn't offering. I had my mother's books. I had my registration document in its folder. I had the harbor, which hadn't changed, and the Susan H. in her slip, which smelled like teak oil and salt, and the particular combination that had always meant my father's boat, and underneath that, my mother's name, Claudia, did not sail. This was the single fact in our relationship that worked in my favor for years, because it meant the Susan H. remained outside her primary territory. She tolerated the boat the way she tolerated my visits, as a condition of the life she'd entered, managed rather than engaged. I graduated from Carrington at 18. I went directly to a 5-year program in marine architecture at a university on the eastern seaboard. My father attended my graduation, alone, playing, and took me to dinner afterward, where we talked about design theory and vessel engineering and the harbor and everything except at the distance that had accumulated between us over 4 years of being 11 hours away by train. He was proud of me. I could see it clearly, and it cost me something to see it, because pride from a distance is a specific kind of pain. I built a career. Marine architecture is a narrow field, and I was good at it, which is not modesty, but a fact I had worked for in the specific way you work for things when you understand early that no one is going to hand you anything. I designed commercial and recreational vessel systems, clock. I took on a consultancy with a harbor development firm in Vance Harbor 3 years after graduating, which brought me back to the same city as my father and Claudia, for the first time in nearly a decade. Those 3 years back in Vance Harbor were the closest my father, and I managed to get after everything.
Oh,
We had dinner on Thursdays, alone, at the same seafood restaurant near the marina where he'd taken me after Carrington graduation. We talked about boats and design and the harbor, and sometimes, carefully, about my mother. He never explained the decision to send me to Carrington, and I never asked him to, because the explanation wouldn't have returned the years, and I had learned by then that some debts can't be paid in explanation. What he said to me once, on a Thursday in November, looking out at the harbor lights, was, "I didn't protect you the way I should have. I want you to know, I understand that." I held that sentence. I still hold it. It was the closest thing to an accounting he ever offered, and I took it for what it was, which was genuine, even if it arrived 11 years after the thing it was accounting for. My father died 3 years ago. A cardiac event, sudden in the evening, at home. I was the one who received the call, because I was the contact listed on his medical forms, which I had not known until the hospital told me. Claudia was in the house when it happened, called the ambulance, and she called her sister, and she called 3 of her friends before she called me, which I know because the call log was produced later in the estate proceedings, and I counted the sequence myself. I was at the hospital when Claudia arrived. She walked in with her sister on one side and a composed expression that I recognized from every room she'd ever managed. Cool. She acknowledged me with a nod, the way you acknowledge someone a clarinet in a professional contact when you don't want to give them more than their designated space. The next 4 weeks moved the weeks after a death move, in the procedural fog of arrangements and notifications and all the administrative machinery of someone's life being formally concluded. I attended. I participated. I performed the role of bereaved daughter with the same efficiency I brought to everything else, because falling apart is a luxury that requires someone to catch you, and I had long since stopped expecting that person to be Claudia. The will was read 4 weeks after the funeral. I should have been prepared for what it contained. I had known Claudia for 20 years. I understood how she managed resources. I had watched her work the rooms of my father's life for 2 decades, with the patient precision of someone who understood that the best time to rewrite a story is before anyone thinks to read the original. What I was not prepared for was the specific version of the document that was submitted to the Vance County Probate Court, the will, dated 18 months before my father's death, signed and notarized, submitted by Claudia's attorney, left the primary estate assets to Claudia, the house, the investment accounts, the marina slip lease, and the vessel registered as the Claudia Rose, 62 feet, currently moored in slip 14 at Vance Harbor Marina. I sat in the attorney's office and read that line twice. The Claudia Rose, the Susan H., had been renamed. At some point in the previous years, without my knowledge, and without my father's apparent objection, Claudia had arranged for the name on the hull to be changed. The boat that my father had christened with my mother's name while my mother was alive to stand at the dock and press her hands to her face, the vessel that had been registered in my name since I was 9 years old, was now the Claudia Rose. And Claudia's version of the will was directing it to herself. I placed the document on the attorney's desk. My hands were flat on the wood. I looked at Claudia across the table, who... She looked back at me with the managed expression of a woman who had thought through this room carefully and was confident in what she had arranged. I said nothing. I took a copy of the document. I walked out. I want to stop here for a moment. Because if you have ever watched someone take something that belonged to you and put their own name on it, literally or otherwise, I need you to drop a comment right now. Just write renamed, and I will know what you mean. And please subscribe if you haven't. Because what I found when I went back through my father's papers and what my attorney Vera Stanton did with what I found, that is the part that changes everything. Don't go anywhere. The folder was in a plastic storage bin in the back of my father's study closet, behind winter coats, and a box of old correspondence and the architectural models he'd kept from his career. I found it 3 days after the will reading, when I went back to the house to retrieve my mother's books, which were the only things in that house that I had any claim to under Claudia's version of events. Claudia was not home. I had asked Dennis to call her, to take her to lunch, to keep her occupied for 2 hours. Dennis, who had watched everything I had watched for 20 years, from one family gathering distance further back, who had never said a direct word about Claudia in all that time, but whose silence had always had a specific quality, the quality of a man maintaining himself at the edge of something he would say when the moment asked him to, did not hesitate for a second. 2 hours, he said. No problem, the folder was labeled, in my father's handwriting, in the pencil script I knew from margins of his engineering notebooks, original estate documents, R.H. Inside, it was a trust document, dated 23 years ago, 7 years before Claudia's version of the will, signed by my father and witnessed by Martin Ossie, who had been his attorney at the time, and who I knew as a name from my childhood, a man I associated with my father's study and formal conversations and the particular smell of good coffee and document paper. The trust directed the primary estate to me upon my father's death, the house, the investment accounts, the marina slip, and specifically, in a separate paragraph, claim, as if my father had wanted to make absolutely certain this item was named independently. The vessel registered to Lena Marie Hartfield, hull identification number stamped in the paragraph, currently moored at Vance Harbor Marina. He had named her by her registration, by the document that had existed since I was 9 years old, not the Claudia Rose. The registration. My name. The number on the hull. Closet. I sat on the floor of my father's study closet, with that folder in my lap for a long time. Outside I could hear the harbor wind moving through the window he had always left cracked. I had a memory of being very young in that study, sitting on the floor beside his desk while he worked. With the same harbor wind through that same crack in the window, and my mother's voice from the kitchen. Some rooms stay themselves even when everything else changes. Hold. There was one more thing in the folder, tucked inside the back cover, folded twice. A handwritten note on my father's personal stationery, Lena. If someone other than you is reading this, something went wrong that I was too slow to fix. I'm sorry for that. The boat is yours. It has always been yours. Your mother's name belongs to you, and so does everything I put under it. Daddy folded the note back the way he had folded it, placed it inside the trust document, put the document inside the folder. Stood up, I called Vera Stanton from the driveway. Vera was 47, a trusts and estates attorney, with an office on the third floor of a building 4 blocks from the harbor. Clean. She had been recommended by Dennis, who had used her for his own estate planning, and described her as the kind of person who reads every page and remembers what she read. She had a concise quality I liked immediately. She didn't perform reassurance. She listened, then told you what she thought, then told you what she was going to do. I met her the following morning. I put the folder on her desk and let her read. She was quiet for 8 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall, the old-fashioned kind with a second hand, and I counted, then she looked up. When was the name changed on the hull? I don't know exactly. We'll find out. She opened her notepad. The vessel registration, do you have the original? I had brought every document from that folder, including the registration certificate my father had handed me at 9 years old, which had lived in a folder in my bookshelf for 22 years, and which I had found still there when I packed my mother's books from my old bedroom. She looked at it. Registration number, my name, dated 22 years ago. She checked it against the hull identification number in the trust document. They matched. She placed them side by side. Now she looked at Claudia's version of the will. She looked at the vessel description in it. Then she looked at me. Has this registration ever been formally transferred? Any legal transfer document, any court filing, anything bearing your signature authorizing a change in ownership? Never. She closed the folder. Then she said the sentence I had been building toward for 3 days, without knowing the exact words it would take. The name change is cosmetic. A hull name has no legal standing on ownership. The registration is the controlling document. If this registration has never been legally transferred out of your name, the vessel belongs to you, regardless of what Claudia's will says about it. A will can only direct what the testator actually owns. Your father could not leave to Claudia something he did not legally possess. She paused. I'm going to need 4 months. I want to do this completely. 4 months, I said. She nodded. In the meantime, she said, do not confront Claudia. Do not contact her about the vessel. Do not go near the marina. Let me build the record first. I agreed. I drove to the harbor and sat in my car and looked at slip 14 from the parking lot. Hole. The boat in it had Claudia Rose painted on her hull in a script that was nothing like my father's handwriting. The teak deck was the same. The ketch rig was the same. The hull number stamped into the fiberglass below the waterline was the same number on the document that had lived in my bookshelf for 22 years. Everything visible had been renamed. Everything that couldn't be changed was still mine. Vera found Martin Ossie on the third week. He had retired from his practice 2 years prior and was living 40 minutes from Vance Harbor in a house near a small lake. He was 71 years old and remembered my father with the particular clarity of people who have professional memory trained to hold exactly what matters. He remembered the trust document. He had drafted it. He had witnessed it. Shakul. He remembered my father coming into his office 23 years ago, specifically to ensure that the estate structure was set before his health situation with my mother became final, because Robert Hartfield was a precise man and a loving one, and he wanted certain things to be unambiguous. He also remembered receiving a call, approximately 4 years before my father's death, from an attorney he didn't know. The attorney had asked questions about the original trust structure in general terms, claiming to be doing routine estate review for the family. Martin had answered in general terms. He had not provided documents. He had not authorized any changes. He had found the call unusual at the time and had made a note of it in his old case files, which he still had, because Martin Osei was also a precise man. Pleld. The attorney who had called was from the same firm that had produced Claudia's version of the will. Ply. Vera submitted a petition to the Vance County Probate Court challenging the validity of the submitted will and asserting qua precedence of the original trust document. Cool. She filed a concurrent motion requesting a hold on any transfer or disposition of estate assets pending the court's review, which meant the vessel could not be sold, transferred, or further encumbered while the proceedings were active. Plistel. The hold was granted in 10 days. Claudia's attorney, a man named Raymond Good, who had the slightly harried quality of someone managing more than was comfortable, filed a response within the week, placing the response asserted that the trust document was superseded by the more recent will, which was standard legal position, and that any vessel described in the original trust had been legally incorporated into the estate under the new document. Full. Vera's reply was brief and methodical. The vessel had never been part of Robert Hartfield's estate to direct because the vessel had never been his. It had been registered in Lita Marie Hartfield's name for 22 years. The registration had never been legally transferred. You cannot bequeath what you do not own. She attached the registration document. The original, dated 22 years ago. My name, printed clearly, with the hull identification number that matched the number stamped below the waterline on the hull of the boat, currently named the Claudia Rose in slip 14. Good had nothing clean to respond with. It was during this period, the second month of the proceedings, while the legal record was being constructed and the probate court was reviewing the competing documents, that Claudia organized her harbor party. I heard about it from Dennis, who heard from a neighbor who had been invited. A Sunday afternoon on the water, champagne, catering, 16 of Claudia's friends. A celebration of what wasn't specified, but Dennis said the timing and the venue, the yacht, specifically the yacht that was under a disposition hold, had the quality of a statement being made. I called Vera. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Go, but don't tell her anything. Don't reference the proceedings. Don't reference the documents. Don't make any legal claims in that setting. Just let her make whatever she's going to make in front of those 16 people." I understood. Vera had been building a record for 2 months. Claudia was about to add to it. I drove to the marina on Sunday afternoon in a dress I had bought for a work presentation the previous month. Navy, fitted, the kind of thing that says I am here on purpose and I know it. I walked down the dock to slip 14 and stepped aboard. Claudia was near the stern with her group when I came up onto the aft deck. The afternoon was clear, harbor light doing its long-angled June thing across the water. 16 people in summer clothes with champagne flutes. Someone had brought a catered spread was arranged on the table I recognized as the one my father had bolted to the deck himself with a wrench and 40 minutes of concentration one Saturday morning when I was 10. Claudia saw me, and the room changed in the specific way rooms change when a variable that wasn't in the plan appears. She crossed to me. Her voice was low and controlled, the register she used for things she didn't want to become scenes, which meant she already understood there was scene potential and was hoping to manage it before it arrived. "Lena, you were not invited today. I know. Then you should go." I looked around at the 16 people who had all stopped their conversations to watch. At the teak deck my father had maintained for 20 years. At the boom overhead that still had the rope cleat my mother had installed herself on a Saturday in August when I was 6, because she hadn't liked the original placement, and my father had handed her the tools and told her to put it where it made sense to her. I came to see the boat, I said. This is my boat, Claudia said, and I need you to leave it. Then she put her hand flat against my sternum and pushed. It wasn't violence. It was the gesture of someone who had been managing spaces for 20 years and had learned that physical authority, applied briefly and calmly, communicated something that words alone sometimes didn't. A closing of territory. A statement about who the space belonged to. I looked at her hand, then at her face. Then, slowly, around at the 16 people who had watched her do it. I stepped back. Not because she had moved me, because I had what I came for 16 witnesses. I walked off the boat, down the dock, to my car. I called Vera from the parking lot. She picked up on the second ring. She pushed me off the vessel, I said, in front of 16 people. A brief silence. Did anyone intervene or speak? No. Everyone just watched. Good. She paused. I'll need their names if you have any of them. I had 4. Cool. The next morning, Vera filed an amendment to our probate petition that included, as an exhibit, a sworn declaration from me regarding the events of the previous afternoon. The declaration described Claudia's physical removal of the legal owner from a vessel currently under a probate hold. It named the 4 witnesses I had identified. It noted the date, the time, and Claudia's exact words. This is my boat. Vera also contacted the Vance Harbor Marina's harbormaster. The Marina kept records of vessel registration for all slip leases. The slip lease for Slot 14 had been transferred into Claudia's name as part of the estate administration. But the harbor master's records, which cross-referenced the vessel's hull identification number against the state's vessel registration database, showed the vessel's legal owner as Lena Marie Hartfield. The marina had been collecting slip fees from Claudia on a vessel that, according to the registration authority, she did not own. The harbor master was, to say the least, interested in this information. Vera requested a certified copy of the registration from the state's vessel documentation office. It arrived in 11 days, clean, unambiguous, my name, my vessel, registered 22 years ago by Robert Hartfield as a gift to his daughter, never legally transferred, never formally changed. Still on record exactly as it had been placed, Claudia's attorney had attempted. Vera discovered through a records request to transfer the registration 3 times in the year following my father's death. All 3 attempts had been rejected by the state documentation office because each required either the current registered owner's signature or a court order establishing new ownership, and Claudia had neither 3 attempts. All failed. The registration had not moved. Vera told me this on a Tuesday afternoon. She set the certified registration copy on the desk between us and placed the 3 rejection notices from the documentation office beside it. She tried, Vera said, 3 times. She knew the registration was in your name. She tried to transfer it and couldn't. Which means when she stood on that deck on Sunday and told 16 people it was her boat, she already knew it wasn't. I looked at the documents on the desk. 22 years old. My name at the top, the hull number in the middle, my father's signature at the bottom, the signature I knew from birthday cards and engineering notebooks, and the note I'd found folded inside the trust folder.
The boat is yours.
It has always been yours. The probate court ruled 6 weeks later. The original trust document, properly executed and witnessed 23 years ago, was valid and controlling. The more recent will was found to contain provisions directing assets that were not part of the testator's estate, specifically the vessel registered to Lena Marie Hartfield, and those provisions were void as to those assets. The remainder of the will's validity was referred for further hearing, which I will tell you the outcome of in a moment. The vessel. Hull identification number matching the registration, held in my name for 22 years, currently moored in Slip 14 at Vance Harbor Marina, under the name Claudia Rose, was confirmed as my legal property. The court issued an order requiring Claudia to vacate the vessel within 14 days and return it to the possession of the registered owner. Vera called me the afternoon the ruling came through. She read me the relevant paragraph in the level tone she applied to everything. Then she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, simply, "Go get your boat." I drove to the marina on a Saturday morning. Dennis came with me. He didn't say much on the drive, which was consistent with Dennis, but when we pulled into the parking lot and I sat for a moment looking at the dock, he said quietly, "Your father would be glad." I walked down to slip 14. The Claudia Rose was there, same as always, same teak decks, same catch rig, same boom with my mother's rope cleat, still in the placement she'd decided, was right on a Saturday in August when I was 6. Claudia was not there. She had vacated the vessel the previous day, which I knew from Vera, who had arranged the formal handover through the marina's harbor master. Claudia's personal items had been removed. The catering supplies from the Sunday party were gone. What remained was the boat, the hull, the deck my father had maintained for 20 years, the rope cleat my mother had placed herself, and a name on the hull that did not belong there. I had arranged for a marine painter to meet me at the dock. He was a practical man with a van full of paint equipment and no particular curiosity about the story behind the job. I told him the current name needed to come off and I wanted the original restored. I gave him the reference photograph I had brought, a print of an old photo my father had taken the day the name was first painted on the hull, my mother standing at the dock with her hands pressed to her face. He worked for 3 hours. I sat on the dock with Dennis and a thermos of coffee and watched the work proceed. When he was finished, he stepped back and looked at the hull, nodded once, called me over. I walked to the edge of the dock and looked at the stern, the Susan H. Navy script. The same style as the original, clean against the hull. Dennis made a sound beside me that wasn't quite a word. He pressed his hand against his eyes for a moment. Then he straightened up and looked out at the harbor. "That's the right name," he said. I stood on the dock for a long time after the painter's van left. Cold. The harbor wind was doing what it does in the morning, moving east off the water, carrying the salt and the engine oil and the particular smell of a working marina that I had been breathing since, before I could identify what made it distinct. Boats came and went from their slips. Someone far down the dock was rigging for a day sail, the metallic sound of lines through blocks carrying over the water the way it does, clean and purposeful. My mother had loved this harbor. She had stood at the bow of this boat, with her feet apart and her face into the wind, and looked like she always belonged there. She had put the rope cleat in the right place on a Saturday morning because she'd looked at the original placement and known it was wrong, and my father had simply handed her the tools because he trusted her judgment. I thought about that. About the things that last and the things that don't. The name on the hull had been changed and then changed back. Claudia had put her own name on it, had tried 3 times to transfer the registration, had hosted parties on a boat she had told 16 people was hers, while knowing the registration said otherwise. All of that effort, all of that construction, and the thing that outlasted it was a document dated 22 years ago and a note folded inside a trust folder and a rope cleat placed by someone who was precise about where things should go. The probate proceedings continued for another 3 months after the vessel ruling. I will not take you through every filing. What I will tell you is that the original trust document, validated by the court, held for the primary estate as well. The house, the investment accounts, the marina slip lease. Claudia had been living in the house for 3 years, under the assumption that it would remain hers. The original trust was unambiguous. She had 4 months to find alternative arrangements. Raymond Good negotiated a settlement on her behalf that allowed her a 6-month transition period and a defined financial settlement from liquid assets. Vera negotiated the terms from my side. I was not present at those meetings. I had said what needed to be said through the documents, and the documents had said it better than I could have. Mei Cho, my father's longtime assistant, called me after the ruling. She had been at the firm when my father worked there and had known him for 20 years. Her voice was careful and warm when she called, the kind of warmth that comes from someone who has been holding something for a long time and is finally allowed to set it down. He talked about you all the time, she said. When you were at Carrington, when you started your career, he kept your registration document in his desk drawer at the firm. I saw him take it out once, just to look at it. He told me he'd given you something when you were 9, and he wanted to make sure it was never lost. He kept it in his desk drawer. I thought about that. My father, at his desk at the firm, in the years after Carrington, in the years of Thursday dinners and careful conversations, taking out a boat registration certificate to look at it, clumsy, keeping it as a reminder of something he'd given and couldn't give again, but had given precisely and permanently enough that it would hold. I took the Susan H. out the following Saturday. Dawn, before the harbor traffic built. Just me, alone, in the way I had learned to sail her in my 20s, when my father and I had managed some afternoons on the water together. The ketch rig handled the same. The teak deck under my feet felt the same. The rope cleat on the boom was exactly where my mother had put it, in the right place, where it had always made sense. I sailed out past the harbor mouth into the open water where the wind builds properly, and the boat finds her pace and everything reduces to what's necessary. Wind and sail and hull, and the particular silence of an engine off, and the world narrowing to its most honest elements. I stayed out for 4 hours. I thought about my mother, who had loved this water and taught me to read its tides. I thought about my father, who had made something precise and permanent in a folder he kept in his desk drawer. I thought about Claudia's hand against my sternum and 16 people watching, and her words, "This is my boat." It had never been her boat. Not for one day of the 22 years it had been on the water. The name on the hull could be changed. The slip lease could be reassigned. The will could be written in whatever language Claudia's attorney had crafted. But the registration, that plain document with my name at the top and a hull number in the middle and my father's signature at the bottom, had sat in my bookshelf and in my father's desk drawer and in the state's documentation records. Unchanged, unambiguous, patient, in the way that documented truth is patient. It did not argue. It did not prepare. It simply waited for someone to read it. Dennis texted me while I was still on the water. 4 words, how does she sail? I looked out at the horizon. The water was doing what water does when the wind is right, moving with a consistency and purpose that has nothing to do with what people decide about it on land. Like she always has, I typed back. I meant the boat. I also meant my mother. The Susan H. is in her slip tonight. I am in an apartment, half a mile from the marina, in a city I chose because of the harbor and the work, and the distance it no longer needs to represent. The rope cleat is where my mother put it. The registration is framed on my wall, not to remind me of what I won, to remind me of what my father gave me at 9 years old, on purpose, with full intention, and what that gift was made of, which was not fiberglass and teak and a sail plan, but something underneath those things. Something that understood that love, when it is precise, when it is documented, when it is placed correctly and maintained carefully, outlasts everything that tries to rename it. Some things are yours from the beginning. Other people can change the name on the hull, but they can't change the number stamped in the material, and the number is always what matters in the end. I am Lena Hartfield. I am a marine architect. My father named a boat after my mother and registered it in my name when I was 9 years old because he loved us both and wanted something that connected us to last. It lasted. If you have something that was given to you precisely and permanently, something that someone has tried to put their own name on, leave a word in the comments. I will read every single one. And if this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Scatter, if you haven't. There is another story in the description that I think you will stay for. Until next time.